back for the special guest segment on Central Dakota Outdoors. We go off into the wild blue yonder on the phone lines, and our very special guest across the phone is Dana Rogers. Good morning, Dana. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys today?
We're doing great. If I know there's some folks that know who you are that are listening throughout the state, but there may be some folks that don't know who Dana Rogers is. Well, you know what? You can't put a label on this guy. He's a conservationist. He's an outdoorsman. He's one of those guys out there helping ensure the future of white-tailed deer, wildlife habitat, the hunting heritage, and he's also a chief master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. And Dana, how long were you in the Air Force?
Well, actually, I'm still active duty. I've been in 27 years, and I'll be retiring next year and moving back here to God's country in South Dakota.
Let's get a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you get to South Dakota?
Well, I was born and raised on a farm and ranch that my third-generation father and uncle ran with my grandparents and my deceased great-grandfather, who homesteaded the place back in 1908, east central South Dakota, east of Pierre, and grew up there and had a love of wildlife, pheasants, deer, and the land instilled in me by my father and my grandparents and my uncle, and loved South Dakota. And once I graduated high school in 1988, I joined the Air Force. And I've traveled quite a bit, as you can imagine, seen a lot of things, but it's funny how that works when you think you know everything and you're 16, 17, 18 years old and you can't wait to get out on your own. Then when you see the big world, you know, dads and uncles and grandparents, they get a lot smarter, and I found out that there was no place better than South Dakota, and I've loved coming back. I was stationed at Ellsworth for quite some time, and now I'm stationed at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, and I cannot wait to get back to South Dakota.
Right. You know, I can definitely feel what you're saying. I was in the Navy myself, and I remember being on the Carl Vinson aircraft carrier, sitting on the fantail, probably the second or third day I was there, and I started daydreaming. The only thing I wanted to hear was a meadowlark coming through my car window going down a gravel road. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, those wonderful morning memories on a crisp South Dakota morning in the summertime in the hayfield. You bet those meadowlarks, they certainly spur memories.
Folks, the way I ran into Dana basically was on the internet. This past year, or this year, the big EHD in South Dakota, the blue tongue, all that bad stuff happening to our herd, and got to digging around, and your name popped up, and just wanted to meet you, wanted to talk to you, and right now you're out and about, and let's talk about this now. EHD, what have you found in your travels?
Well, EHD is epizootic hemorrhagic disease. It is actually often called blue tongue, but they're actually two separate viruses. They are caused, biologists say, the studies have shown, from a biting midge, like the small no-see-ums that everybody deals with in the summertime. They're much worse in a drought year. Their nesting habitat, those bugs, are around muddy areas, around ponds. So in drought areas, that type of habitat becomes much more prevalent. And then if they're infected, they'll bite deer, and sometimes deer die, and sometimes they don't. It's not always fatal. But there have been a lot of parts of South Dakota this year, Scott, who have been really, really hammered. And my home farm is one of those. We were just coming off EHD in 2012. Many of the deer hunters out there may remember that. That was extremely hard on deer down in south central South Dakota, taking as many as 80 to 90% in some counties. So coming off of that, the herds had been coming back pretty well. And this year, from what I have gleaned from the game fish and parks and talking to biologists and other hunters, the Pierre, south of Pierre, and then east over to the Huron area down to Chamberlain have been significantly impacted. In my particular home area, within 5 miles in any direction, my neighbors, landowners, farmers, other deer hunters have found at least 70 carcasses. That was late summer, early fall, before any seasons. I personally found 7 carcasses without really looking. So it's really had a hard impact on that particular area.
It seems you know a lot about this EHD, and one of the things that I've read and seen on the internet is that it usually attacks the bucks over the does. Is that something you find as well?
Well, it will attack all deer. And again, I am not a biologist. I'm not a trained scientist.
Right.
I'm just getting most of my knowledge from talking to the professionals and doing as much reading as I can. It will affect all deer. I found as many does as bucks, and we seem to notice the larger bucks more, of course, because that's when we find those, they make a significant memory impact. There's fewer of them, of course. As you age, there's the herd will decrease through natural mortality, hunting, and other accidents. I don't know that that's a fact that it actually hits and affects adult bucks more than does. It's not been my experience and my anecdotal vision, but it's certainly noticed a lot more. I know we found several bucks and called those into conservation officers, and many of those were 3, 4, 5-year-olds, which many hunters would be happy to tag. So
right.
that has a big impact. Those were the excess deer, if you will, the ones that the population that would be hunted. So that is one of the reasons that the coalition that I work with, the South Dakota Big Game Coalition, we kind of politicked, and the Game Fish and Parks Commission saw fit to shut down the sale of tags towards the end of the summer, and also take tags back and reimburse hunters for that, because there was a large number of deer that had died in many of those areas. So there would be a lot less deer to actually hunt.
And you would think, how can the midge tell if it's a buck or doe too? If they're going to bite, they're going to bite.
That's true. I've heard anecdotal thoughts on that, but again, no scientific basis. One rancher friend of mine had an anecdotal thought that, hey, those bucks, they have more velvet, and those velvet covered antlers, they're not hardened yet, so they're all engorged in blood at the time, so that gives those midges something to get easy access to food and transfer that virus. So there may be something to that, but no biological facts that I'm aware of. Now,
you were out, are you filled up yet, or you still got tags you got to fill?
Oh, no, I tell you what, I'm about the worst hunter in the state of South Dakota right now, Scott. I've been hunting for 2 weeks, bow hunting, which is my primary weapon of choice, and I have not filled a tag in South Dakota yet, because the deer numbers where I've been at have been extremely low, and I'm a bit fussy too. I like to wait for the older, mature animals, and there just hasn't been any showing up in front of me or on my trail cameras, but there have been many taken. The South Dakota hunters that may get out there on Facebook and look at some of the social media sites, there have been a lot of really nice bucks taken around the state. So there's been some very nice animals taken, so that's very encouraging to see that there's some great South Dakota hunters out there having a great time, enjoying God's creation, and filling their tags with some nice venison.
Now, is it just the whitetails you go after, or are you out there going after elk and other things?
Well, I do when I'm lucky to draw a tag, but being military, I don't have quite as much time to pursue as many things as I would like. I've built points for elk, and we have been blessed here in South Dakota with a nice prairie elk herd and a good South Dakota population in the Black Hills, and there's been a lot of really nice bulls taken there too.
Let's talk about bucket lists and a hunt that's on your bucket list. If you could go anywhere, do anything, what would you do? What would you go after?
Oh, well, I'm really dreaming about trying to cash in some of those points and hunting some elk in the Rocky Mountain states once I retire. And when we move back, we're planning a house around Hill City, and hopefully getting out and sharing some of that great experience with some of my friends who may draw a tag or myself. Personally, I'd like to do some spring bear hunting. I'd also like to continue to elk hunt. Mule deer, antelope are a favorite target in the fall as well when I get time to do that. And whitetail's really the passion. But those are the things I'd like to do every day. Maybe, who knows, if I hit the lottery, maybe New Zealand for red stag.
There it is.
Or somewhere in southern Africa for a mixed plains game bow hunt. Those one can always dream.
That's right. Now, being in the military, like you said, not a lot of time. So do you focus on the big game, or do you get out at all? Do you get an opportunity to do any pheasant hunting or any duck or goose hunting at all?
Well, when I was growing up, my cousin and I actually probably preferred duck and goose hunting back in the 80s to anything. And we had a lot of water at that time, 86, 87, so we shot some ducks, but I haven't been waterfowl hunting since. I do get a generous amount of leave through the Air Force, but I primarily focus on big game anymore. The family farm and ranch, what I've really liked to do is I've got a few cousins and some cousins have kids, and we like to get together around the Thanksgiving time frame and and do some pheasant hunting. And so I was blessed to have a few cousins and some of their children, and we got together and had a good family pheasant hunt over the Thanksgiving holiday. Unfortunately, we weren't very good with the shotguns, but there were birds around.
Well, yeah, just keep it up. You'll get better, that's for sure. Now, another thing I noticed about you, Dana Rogers, is you belong to several different groups that are out there, the outdoors-based hunting groups. What would you suggest to the listeners out there? What groups would you recommend folks look into joining, and why?
Well, I guess it would be driven by their primary interest and passion. I think it's an extremely important thing that the sportsman not only be a consumer of the wildlife out there, but help with the management and the preservation. Many folks that don't hunt may not understand what the Pittman-Robertson Act does, or that our license fees and tax and excise tax on ammunition and hunting gear and things like that directly goes to fund wildlife conservation, habitat management, things like that. With the ever-expanding population of our globe, the farmers are, kind of forced to feed the entire world. We've got new farming practices. So that limits the habitat. And with more people, there's more houses being built. So what I would recommend folks do is I would think, hey, if you really are passionate and love something, such as pheasant hunting, duck hunting, elk hunting, deer hunting, find some habitat organizations like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Pheasants Forever. There's many wonderful organizations, Teddy Roosevelt Conservation, within the state of South Dakota, life member of the South Dakota Bowhunters Association. And we have a new kind of a fledgling organization that is just a grassroots movement. It's not necessarily any type of club or anything like that. It's just many concerned big game hunters around the state of South Dakota. It's called the South Dakota Big Game Coalition. And again, I'm just one guy. There's hundreds and thousands of passionate hunters out there and people who care. And if we get together and we band together and we talk to the politicians, we can make sure that they understand what is important to us. And habitat is absolutely critical, because without habitat, we will not have the wildlife to enjoy. And the thing that a lot of people don't take into consideration here in South Dakota, we have a lot of tourism industry. And a lot of that tourism is generated by hunting and fishing. And if we do not have those wildlife populations or those fisheries, then a lot of that tourism will dry up. Now, there's a lot of different pieces that go into that, but to answer your question, I would get involved, talk to the conservation organizations, see which ones meet your particular goals and your mindset. I would recommend Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Within the state of South Dakota, the South Dakota Bowhunters. The South Dakota Wildlife Federation is also a wonderful organization that politics and lobbies on behalf of the sportsmen. And then the new South Dakota Big Game Coalition come to mind.
Well, there you go, folks. It's Dana Rogers, and sure hope that you fill those tags. And you got some great weather for it now, though, don't you?
Well, I was very happy to see the cold weather finally come in, and a little bit of moisture and a little snow throughout the state. So these seasons are starting to wind down. A lot of animals have been taken, but if you find the food and you find the cover, get out there and check out that wonderful public land in the state of South Dakota. A lot of school and public land, BLM, national forests. One thing that I would always ask people to do when you're out, please be respectful. Farmers and ranchers, they feed these wildlife. So respect the farmers and ranchers, respect the wildlife, and just have a great hunt and enjoy it.
Folks, we're talking with the U.S. Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Dana Rogers from South Dakota. You're over in Illinois right now. We're going to get you back here very soon, and hope to get you into the studios in person, get some interviews, get some memory recalls from you, and you are welcome on CDO anytime.
Thank you very much, Scott, and everybody out there that's hunting, have a great season.
All right, we'll be back with more of Central Dakota Outdoors right after this.